Welcome to Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Post Game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. You can also watch the show on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports. Joined today on the episode, Mavs Sports Illustrated writer, covers all things for the Dallas Mavericks for Sports Illustrated. You can find him on Twitter at Grant Afseth. Grant Afseth joining me on the show. Grant, what's going on?
Not much. I'm looking forward to being able to talk about a lot of different stuff for sure. It'll be interesting.
A lot to get into on this episode of Inside the Mavs as the Mavericks now enter the All-Star break on a 6-game winning streak after beating up on the San Antonio Spurs on Wednesday. The Mavericks now tied for the longest win streak in the NBA currently with the Boston Celtics, who also are on a 6-game winning streak, but the Mavericks do hold the longest current winning streak in the Western Conference, currently sits 7th right now in the West. 6.5 games from the number 1 spot. We'll talk about some of that throughout the course of the show as well. But more importantly, they are that much closer to getting into that top 6 so they can avoid the play-in. But a lot to get to in this episode because, Grant, we'll start here. You know, just a couple of weeks ago, this was a team that was not playing well defensively, questions about Jason Kidd and what he was doing with this team. And then we have the trade deadline, and they bring in P.J. Washington from the Charlotte Hornets. They also bring in Daniel Gafford from the Washington Wizards, and the two of them so far have been really the perfect fit for what the Mavericks have been needing and what they've been able to bring, and have been part now of the last 3 games that has seen the Mavericks really play well on both ends of the floor. Washington and Gafford making huge differences for this team so far.
Yeah, definitely. I think there was a clear need for a backup center at the very least. Whether that was like the most pressing need or not, it was definitely very high on the list of needs. Considering the lack of success they had without Derek Lively, they didn't really have that sort of interior shot blocking presence outside of him. With having to rely on other options on the roster amid a lot of injuries, like Maxi Kleba is a helpful switching option, and he's played great lately, but with his small toe injury, it's kind of difficult to fully rely on that as like a primary, relief option or backup option. So having another, stylistic match to kind of fill the void of what Derek Lively provides when he's not on the floor, but also have a full center rotation when you need that traditional option out there against certain matchups is very helpful, while having that kind of change up option with Maxi as that small ball 5. That adds a lot of depth, a lot to like. And then you still have Dwight Powell as an option to kind of throw in there whenever you need someone to fill in, or during injuries that may occur in the future, or just in general, another look to throw out there that has been with the team for a while. And then you look at the wing spot with PJ Washington. I think defensively he's provided a lot to like. He's been fully embracing his responsibilities on that end, hasn't worried about the shots that are coming his way or getting plays called for him. And, his 3 ball has not fallen yet. And he's kind of struggled with that over the last couple of years after the start of his career being, very strong from the perimeter. But, the quality of looks that he'll get the opportunity to knock down shots. And it'll just be interesting to see how that transpires. But, not to go too far into it in one little comment here, but, not Grant. I was just looking at my screen. PJ Washington, a big difference compared to a guy like Grant Williams. He has some versatility that you didn't really get. Like already, for example, Grant Williams scored 10 points in the post all season with the Mavs. PJ Washington entering last night's game already had like 6 points out of post ups because he's someone you can kind of dump the ball to at times against certain matchups, or he can get catch positioning with a seal in transition or semi-transition. And, those are like dimensions you don't really have or did have with Grant Williams. And then, the ability to attack closeouts. He's just a little more capable attacking, with the ball in his hands compared to Grant Williams. And I think we're seeing that. And you're able to get impact when the 3 isn't falling in ways that previously weren't available to the team.
Washington has brought some significant versatility to this team. We'll dive more into that, but let's take a quick break here on Inside the Mavs and hear a word from today's sponsor of our episode, as our episode today is brought to you by Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs as we continue our discussion on the Mavericks as they now enter into the All-Star break, talking about the impact of P.J. Washington. You look at the numbers so far, Grant, for P.J. Washington in 3 games. My man's a plus 51 so far, got a defensive rating of 88.7 and an overall net rating of plus 28.5. Well, yeah, it's a small sample size. That just gives you an indication and an idea of the defensive impact that he's had so far. And one of the things that we saw in the game against San Antonio, he took the defensive assignment at times against Victor Wembanyama, and you saw the physicality that Washington was able to bring. Well, yes, he's a guy that goes about 6'7" or so. He's got a wingspan that goes 7'2", and you saw how that length and the athleticism and the physicality bother Wembanyama at times. And I think that's something that if you're a Mavericks fan that you're looking to see more of. He looks like he's wanted to take on that defensive assignment night in and night out. And to your point, the shot, I think, will continue to fall because of the amount of open looks you're going to get playing alongside Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. You've got no choice but to start knocking some of those shots down based off the availability that you're going to have. But I think the defensive impact that we've seen for Washington is a breath of fresh air, given the skill set that he can bring. And one of the things that he has talked about that he wants to bring is someone who is providing multiple facets of defensive versatility. Washington so far has been providing that for the Mavericks.
Yeah, definitely. I think you also get that athleticism that you didn't have with Grant Williams, and especially if you are going to have someone who's not in their peak shape entering the season and sustaining that throughout the whole season. There's a difference between someone who's naturally going to be at an athleticism deficit when comparing head to head. And Washington already mid-season, you're seeing that he's just a better athlete overall coming to the team. You don't have to worry about any of the other things where you're focused on like what is his ideal playing weight against certain matchups, because that's actually something that I think a lot of people don't understand what the nuance of the weight conversation is. Sometimes, like in Boston, Grant Williams added weight to be able to handle certain matchups, like against Giannis and things like that. Like it's difficult when you don't have that like on par athleticism as other options at your position, because then you have to be more focused on adding weight, shedding weight. And while other people aren't really even having to worry about that, like he's to Grant Williams' credit, he's done a lot for what he has as a disposal from a physical and tangible standpoint. But when you're trying to test your limits in a larger role, sometimes it's worth that gamble, but sometimes it's not necessarily going to be a fit if the team situation isn't great. Boston, there's a difference there where they shrunk the floor and switched everything, and it was more compact. And you're playing more with force as opposed to running shooters off the line, making extra efforts, kind of like how the Mavericks were playing defense during that conference finals run, where they had athletic wings that were making those rotations and recoveries. So I think that's a distinction to what they have now, is they're able to play more like they did in the past, where they have the athleticism to kind of run shooters off the line, be able to recover and play that sort of style. Because, I mean, regardless of what people will say about Luka Doncic's defense, I think he's better than people give him credit for. But with any superstar, you still have to make scheme calculations where you're not going to have him like hard hedge and recover. You're not going to have him do like blitzing and then getting all the way to the weak side. Like even if he holds his own in isolation situations, there are still things as a defender that he's not going to do in the overall team concept, because you're trying to mitigate what he has to do in terms of a workload. So you have to have that athleticism ideally around him. And sometimes you have to try different personnel combinations to see what you can get away with, what's maximized, what, results in a deficit. And I think that's what we're seeing right now is the athletic profile is very essential to kind of maximize how they want to play defense. And so far it's been very effective, with Victor Wembanyama even coming up empty on some possessions against, against PJ. That was an intriguing thing to see. He's held his own against other matchups out on the perimeter as well too, very effectively. So overall, there's a lot to like about that. And I think that's just like a key distinction. It's not all just about like defense is the same with every team. There's like different nuance differences in terms of like, scheme, what you have to do with certain lineups. And I think right now what we're seeing so far is that just PJ Washington's a better fit for how the defense has to be maximized around, Luka and also Kyrie, because, Kyrie is a very active participant as well on defense. But regardless, as a 6'1" guard, there's also going to be those natural limitations that you're going to have to account for, whether he's giving maximum effort or not. That's something that they now have the option of with a rim protector at the 5, and then more athleticism on the wing. Because now they have also, Derek Jones is still, in the fold as well. You have Dante Exum, who will come back from injury eventually. Josh Green as well. And then you also have Maxi Kleba at the 5, who's shown the ability to switch and hold his own as well. So that's a lot of versatility that wasn't necessarily like had, whether it was like last year's roster or even just like adding in those pieces, this season. There's just a lot to work with. And, that could be very interesting to see how that's utilized during the stretch run of the season.
And you've seen the pace of play for this team as well. They're getting much more up and down in transition, and part of that has been predicated on the way that they've been playing on the defensive end. And Kyrie talked about it, post-game against the San Antonio Spurs. Getting out on the fast break is leading to some easy baskets for them. That's allowing them opportunities to be able to put pressure on opposing teams, and that all starts on the defensive end. We talked about Luka Doncic. You look at some of the numbers, some of the advanced numbers for him. He's been one of the best post defenders in the league so far this year. He's also a guy so far this season that's top 7 in steals. Like, he's doing things on the defensive end that's setting a tone, that's allowing this team that has, you talked about with the profile of player that has to be around Doncic to maybe compensate for a deficit at times on the defensive end. You're seeing guys being able to elevate their game because Luka's setting the tone on that defensive end. And one of the things that I loved about the trades that they made with Washington and with Daniel Gafford, it felt like now guys could naturally slot into the rotation and, more importantly, into the roles that they were capable of playing. And once now that Derek Lively is back, and hopefully once he is able to get going more going forward here, not be on the minutes restriction and coming back from the broken nose, for me, the ideal lineup based off of what they have now, which I think allows them to play the kind of defense that they want to, but also be able to get up and down in transition. I'm looking at Luka, Kyrie, Josh Green, PJ Washington, and Derek Lively as your starting 5. Then you've got a guy like Daniel Gafford being able to come off the bench to really be able to help you in terms of your rebounding, block shots as well. You talked about Maxi Kleba and his ability to do different things from a versatility standpoint, especially if we're going to be doing a lot of switching on the defensive end. Kleba can knock down shots from the outside as well. But then you still got guys like Tim Hardaway Jr., like Jaden Hardy, and others that could provide some scoring punch off the bench. And now Derek Jones Jr. and Dante Exum. One of the things that we've been discussing on the show is the fact that Exum and Jones have been playing a lot more extended minutes than what they're traditionally used to playing. And you saw how fatigue was getting to them at times. Now, with them coming off the bench based off of the rotation and the lineup that I think they should have, you should be able to get much more effective play from Jones and from Exum, because now the pressure isn't on them to have to do more than what they're capable of and to do it in extended minutes. I think they've got a 10-man rotation now that you can feel really confident about based off the way they want to play. And with Luka and Kyrie obviously leading you offensively, this team feels like they're in a much better spot based off their personnel now than what they were just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of different lineup combinations for sure. I think particularly having more perimeter size when you're going to go to that small ball switching matters a
Yes.
lot because like three guards, you don't have to play like Kyrie, Jaden, and Tim all in the same 1 through 3. You could maybe go with Derek Jones with PJ and Maxi as the 3 through 5. So then you have more size out there, and that's just the luxury of having a deeper team too, like where in general, regardless of the matchup, you can really focus on what is going to help get the win for that day. You don't have to live and die by an identity that may come up short on certain nights. Like if there's a night where maybe Tim Hardaway isn't the best option out there, you can mix it up by maybe having Dante as more of a wing option and having that size, that full court defensive capability, the dribble penetration, things like that, or vice versa. You just need to spread it out and have shooting out there. Maybe Tim's a better option. So I think that's the makeup of a better team where you don't have to live and die by a core identity where it actually, like on paper, there are some matchups where that's not a good configuration for you.
Right.
Yeah, so it's like just a lot of different options. And one thing I thought was interesting was Jason Kidd essentially mentioning one thing they can maybe look at more is playing Gafford at the 4. And to me, with Lively at the 5, like, is that when we start to see him taking like corner threes more to have the spacing?
I
He
was
hasn't
about to
really done
say,
that
I
yet.
don't know if I want Gafford and Lively on the floor at the same time just yet, because if you're going to basically in that situation, you're putting Derek Lively in a corner, because if you're going to have Gafford and Lively on the floor together at the same time, both of them really good in pick and roll situations, can both rim run and do those kinds of things. I don't know if I want both of them on the floor at the same time, unless one of them is going to develop a little bit more of an outside jump shot. And Lively in this case would be the guy, because look, we saw some of it during the pre-combine stuff and being able to, knock down some open shots. My man hasn't shown really any of that in the league so far, and I don't know if I'm ready to see that quite just yet with Gafford and Lively on the floor at the same time, because somebody's got to get out there and shoot some shots if that's going to have both of them on the floor at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of tough too right now because you're entering into a pivotal part of the season too, where experimentation is probably less of what you want to do. But it was interesting to
Right.
see or to hear that. So that's another thing to whether they actually do that or not. Something to keep an eye on for sure. Just an interesting thought because we definitely haven't seen Lively. Like, has he even taken a 3 this
I don't
season?
think he's even taken a 3 so
I
far
don't
this
I
year.
don't remember him. Yeah, if it was, I must have missed it. Definitely something he's taken a lot of shots of. Like I mean, which like in shoot arounds and practices, which isn't really like a big observation considering like Dwight Powell, JaVale McGee last year, like all kinds of guys that don't really shoot them in games always get those shots up. But definitely something as Derek Lively continues to develop will be something to watch because I remember I actually did interview his Duke coach John Shire like in mid-January if I remember correctly, and he did say he's very confident that Lively will end up shooting threes in his career, and it's just a matter of getting the I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the vibe is like the green light and the reps having the confidence in it. And yeah, so that was he thinks it'll be a factor in his career essentially is what it is. So how soon that happens will be interesting to kind of see. I don't think we're really going to get that. Like coming out of All-Star break, we're not going to see him being Kristaps Porzingis at all. We might not even see him take Eddie, but definitely something to keep an eye on in the next couple years of his career. Because that could open up different creative options if you're facing a team like the Minnesota Timberwolves who have a lot of size. Because I've seen a couple of games this year. I mean, no, not a couple, including Abu Dhabi. There's been like 5 games against 5 or 6 games or whatever. I've lost track against that
Yes.
team, and they've looked very small against them. So definitely something to think about, especially if the Timberwolves factor in as a playoff matchup in the future.
Yeah.
But yeah. Definitely more pressing topics of conversation for sure, though.
If Lively starts knocking down 3-pointers, that's scary hours. If Lively's going to start knocking down 3-pointers for the Mavericks. But look, we've seen this team now win 6 straight games. Luka and Kyrie, I mean, the offensive music that these two make together when they're on the floor at the same time. I mean, you saw the incredible shot that Kyrie made over Victor Wembanyama with the over the shoulder behind the head layup that he had. I mean, just incredible stuff from him. But I want to stick on Luka for just a quick second because we know about the national conversation around Luka, and you look at the numbers that he's putting up so far this year. My man's shooting the 3-pointer better than he has it in his entire career, shooting at it at a 36, 37% clip on volume with about 9-10 attempts per game. He's leading the league in scoring. He's top 10 in steals. I mean, he's top 5 in assists. Like, he's doing everything that an MVP candidate is supposed to do. And now this team is winning. And I think it gets to the discussion of why this MVP award is always so controversial. It feels like every single year, because the narrative around it changes. Because any other year where a guy is leading a team on a 6-game win streak now, 9 games, a season high now, 9 games above 500 with the eye-popping numbers that a Luka Doncic is putting up, he would be an easy top 2 and not 2 MVP candidate. But yet, obviously, Nikola Jokic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Giannis, what he's doing in Milwaukee, I think it just speaks to the amount of talent in the league. But Luka's got to get, and Jason Kidd mentioned it after the game against San Antonio, the MVP, train and candidacy and all of that, it needs to start for Luka Doncic, because he's been putting up insane numbers so far this year. And I didn't even mention the 50-point game that he had on Christmas Day in Phoenix, then the 73-point game that he had against the Atlanta Hawks. So he's been putting up just insane numbers so far this year.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if they continue to succeed coming out of the All-Star break, getting wins and moving up a little bit in the standings, I think the conversation will heat up for sure. I think there's a lot of just focus on win-loss and not really like the nuances of like player situations, like who's got what supporting cast around them, what have they, kind of battled through this year, things of that nature, which is kind of interesting because the year Russell Westbrook won it, it was like Kevin Durant left you, you're averaging a triple-double, and you're like the whatever seed, the 6th seed or whatever the heck.
I think
Thunder
they were the 8th
year.
seed, and when they still had the 8 seeds getting into the playoffs without the play-in.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like it just flips because then then it becomes a matter of like you have to be a top whatever, like 3 seed no matter what. So it's definitely like a kind of ever changing of the goalposts in a sense. But
Yeah.
with Joel Embiid being ineligible for it after missing too many games with the 65 player or 65 game player participation rules for the postseason awards. I definitely think right now we're looking at probably, as you said, like Jokic, Giannis, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I mean, Kawhi Leonard is another name that people have started to kind of throw out there that's gained more traction with the Clippers succeeding at a very high level after that initial stretch of James Harden joining the team and adjusting. So it's definitely a lot of talent out there, but I definitely think as well, like Luka's production is like legitimately historic. He's shouldering a team that dealt with a lot of injuries. Like I think we're barely past 50% of games played where he had even like Kyrie Irving next to him. And most of these teams, they haven't really lost that many games due to injury in terms of like key players sitting out. Like the Oklahoma City Thunder have been a very healthy team. And, that's not to say, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander should get knocked for that by any stretch because he's had a brilliant season. The Thunder have been, a very good team. But I think, what Luka has done should, I think, carry extra weight considering the circumstances. And if you look at his personal, win-loss when he plays, I think that's also something that doesn't really get factored in because they're, I think, 3-5 when he doesn't even play. And that's not factoring in the record when he plays without like Kyrie Irving and things of that nature. So I think, he's been very productive and successful when he's been on the court. And I think it's just kind of strange when you have it weighed down for individual players' candidacy when you're like not even looking at like the team's win-loss without a guy and things of that nature because, he's carrying an incredible workload and the results are historic. But I mean, losing when you're not even on the court, that just seems like, I don't know. It just
That
seems
should be the
like a lot of
definition
like
of an
surface level
MVP.
skimming of like candidates, and then we're like ranking off of win loss and standings, and then like averages. Like, yes, he has great stats, but this team won more overall. But yeah, like 5 of those losses aren't with Luka Doncic. It's just, yeah, it's interesting. That's why there's a lot of season left to be played for these awards, and if they keep winning, that takes care of a lot of things overall. And I think it's definitely been something that's heating up, is his trajectory for MVP, and will be something to watch out of the break for sure.
Yeah, and it'll be fun to watch him however long he plays in the All-Star game. Luka doesn't necessarily play all that much during All-Star weekend. So he and Derek Lively will be representing the Dallas Mavericks this year in the All-Star game and in the Rising Stars game. So shout out to Lively and Luka for their participation during All-Star weekend. And Kyrie Irving has been spectacular. I mean, we could go on and on about Luka and Kyrie. Kyrie's impact, you can tell how comfortable he is. You can tell that the way that he's playing like veteran leader guy, doing it on both ends of the floor. And we mentioned a little bit earlier, just the offensive creativity. He took over. I mean, look, the Mavericks were, sleepwalking in that first quarter against San Antonio. Kyrie Irving took it upon himself to say, no, we're not losing tonight's game, scoring 17 points, in the second quarter, and really turning things around. And really from that point on, really dominated the game from a scoring standpoint. And those are the kinds of things that you did not see in years past with Luka Doncic, having that kind of teammate that was able to take over games. And here's the fun part about Kyrie. It all came within the flow of the game. He didn't force anything. It didn't feel like he was trying to do anything outside of himself. He simply turned up the aggressiveness in that second quarter, and it came within the team structure and the flow of the offense. And you saw how beautifully it worked out for the Mavericks and the way that Kyrie Irving was able to take over that game against San Antonio.
Yeah, and that's what's always makes it interesting, the conversation about like, does that duo work? Again, it's more of like analysis skimming from people who kind of like it's like win loss. Yeah, but like they didn't have wings, or they didn't have a rim protector last year. Like it's just crazy overall the way like that kind of conversation forms who gets things like the MVP award and all of that stuff. But yeah, it's definitely been impressive to see him pick his spots. It's something that he's makes him a great player alongside other great players, whether it's Kevin Durant, LeBron James, or Luka. He just has that knack for feeling out the game early, kind of like processing almost like a supercomputer. Like, all right, this is how they're going to play me. I know when I'm going to get it. Whenever I'm running this bench unit, I'm going to attack them this way. All kinds of stuff. He absorbs the information, uses it to his advantage throughout games. And there's just not very many players that you see capable of doing things like, even like early in the year against the Milwaukee Bucks, when we talked about it after the game, he scored like 30 plus in the second half after like barely
Yes.
scoring at all in the first half. Like he can be one of those few players where shots aren't falling early. He's not going to lose confidence, and he's going to actually have that mentality to where he's going to process his advantages and then exploit them as much as possible when the game matters the most. And, that's definitely something that we haven't really had, because Jalen Brunson's reached that type of status as a player in New York. And also, I mean, like later, very, very late in his tenure with the Mavs. So what we're seeing is a very like dynamic combination that we haven't really like seen on that consistent basis. And now it'll be important to get the amount of games played together with Luka and Kyrie in the lineup on a consistent basis, as we've seen since his return from injury. And if that can sustain with the new players brought into the fold, build continuity and chemistry, there's a lot to like about what they can provide and have an impact on. Because I think the only like real remaining roster hole for the most part that we see like pressing need was the need for more depth at guard
Yep.
because of injuries.
Agreed.
But when they're healthy, you don't have that necessarily as a key issue, because then you'll get Dante Exum, who can play on the wing and provide backcourt relief. But that's just the key to all of it, is just, again, staying healthy for sure. So if that can happen, unlike last year's post All-Star break stretch run where one was in the lineup, one was coming back, and the other one was out, then that definitely should translate to more, not more results, because they went 2 for 9 or 2 and 9 in their last 11 games last year and take that the last two. I would hope that the bar is not very high. So I
Right.
would hope that we're automatically assuming better results than that.
Last few minutes of our show today, I want to make sure to give flowers to Josh Green, who's really turned the corner, really starting to play well, especially knocking down threes in the corners. He's been, I would say, over the last month, really, really good for them, and the confidence growing for him now that the trade, talks and things have, settled down. One of my favorite moments of the season so far came really immediately after, the trade deadline had passed. That he went out there against New York. He threw down a dunk in transition that was like, all right, I'm here to stay, damn it. Like, I'm not going anywhere. You could tell my man was really ready to play against New York in one of the wins that they had in that East Coast, road trip. But I think for him, the confidence continues to grow. Him being in the starting lineup, you're seeing what that's doing for him and the way it has been able to play. And the other guy that you look at that's been playing well, and we'll have to have a conversation about this down the road too, because as well as Tim Hardaway Jr. played to start off the season, you're always going to have up and down experiences with the THJ experience. But Jaden Hardy has been able to take advantage of his opportunities, especially over the last few weeks. And I thought has played pretty well for the Mavericks, being able to start to knock down some mid-range jumpers. We know that he has the capabilities of knocking down shots from three. But Jaden Hardy, I feel like, is starting to take another step. And maybe they need to see even more opportunities because of the way that he's starting to play. He got off to a slow start earlier this year, but Jaden Hardy, I feel like, has come on as of late as well. What have you thought about his progress as of late?
Yeah, I think there's actually one play that really stood out to me that may not seem like a huge thing, but is definitely one of the list of on the list of priorities that he had for improvement was his communication on defense. There was a stacked pick and roll play, I believe, against the Wizards where he was responsible for the back screener and Kyrie Irving was involved in the action and they had a big involved as well. I think it was Maxey. And he called out for Kyrie to switch and he neutralized the entire development of the play by having it on point, on time. And it was I think Corey Kispert took a bad shot. It was a tough contested shot because it was kind of later in the clock and the play got blown up. So little things like that are really important for him. He's competitively guarded on the ball as well. So if he's communicating off the ball, paying attention, where player movement is developing, and he's able to provide that off the catch offensive impact and also make some plays picking spots, that's exactly what they are looking for from him. And I think he's been more poised in recent weeks at getting to his spots as a ball handler, whether he's snaking ball screens and getting into the gap or just making plays in general, like pushing on the break. I think he's been more poised instead of there's been some plays where early in the year where he would kind of try to do a low sweep through all the time. I think like he had it. I don't want to put assume what his reads are, but it seemed like he was really constantly going to that, whether it was open or not, and then kind of falling, turning the ball over, or ending up with a tough finish attempt that was all glass or things like that. Like the downside plays, I think, have been far less frequent. And what you ideally would like to get from him as strengths have been more frequent. And then, with Josh Green, that kind of ties into the conversation with Luka and Kyrie as a duo, in my opinion, because a lot of what we talked about, a lot of people talked about, not just us, in general, was the lack of, I guess you could say, comfort or rhythm that he had alongside, Luka and Kyrie, to end last year. And even to start this year as well. And I think that's a big part of having all those guys available is then players like Josh Green can continue to build on that. The offense can install more things or just get comfortable in their reads at a maximized level before the playoffs. And I think even when the Mavericks are trying little things like going with their two-man actions more in the last couple of games with Luka and Kyrie, screening for each other and vice versa, or one of them just being involved in a multiplayer screening action, the more those things can happen and players can see how that develops, how teams are going to play those, that matters a lot because not every team's going to approach those the same. There's going to be different looks and, one coverage could happen with one team and another. But if you only play sparingly, you're not going to get multiple games, a lot of extended opportunities, seeing all of those coverages. And I think Josh has now been able to at least get enough opportunity to be comfortable within his role because he's also been effective without one of those players in the lineup, which has been the case last year as well, where he's able to handle the ball more. They're running a few more actions for him. And I think now it's just kind of coming together for him. And a big part of it is that 3-point shooting. He's not hesitating on the catch really at all. Like even in transition, he's been ultra efficient as a 3-point shooter in the corner in transition. He's just getting right into the shot. There's no overthinking there. And then that same that's kind of like just player development. He's got a lot of those qualities where you're getting the strengths at a more consistent basis and the downsides aren't happening as often. But if he can continue to hone in defensively, I think that would be a big thing. I think getting continuity with the pick and roll, like big defenders, will be important because they have different options out there. They haven't really been healthy this year on a consistent basis as well. Having that even beyond the shooting, I think is probably more important for the Mavs since he's a very frequent point of attack defensive option, especially when he's playing with Luka and Kyrie. He takes on a very important defensive role. And that's like screen navigation, that's like containing ISOs, all that stuff. Communicating, all those little nuances come from a lot of chemistry with your teammates, and you only get that by playing a high volume of minutes, alongside each other.
So as this team enters the All-Star break now, they're 7th in the West. They're 32-23 on a season-high 6-game winning streak, a season-high 9 games above 500. When they come out of the All-Star break, they'll meet Kevin Durant and the Phoenix Suns at the American Airlines Center on February 22nd, so they get a full week off before they get back onto the floor. Where is this team now after all the things that they've gone through? From an injury perspective, they've played more starting lineups than any team in the league so far this year. Obviously, with the now additions of PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, how stacked the West has been throughout the course of the year. You mentioned the Clippers a little bit earlier. They've been one of the best teams in the league since about mid-November, have been beating down pretty much everything, in their way. Where are the Mavericks now as far as their Western Conference picture and the confidence that you have that they can get inside the top 6, knowing obviously how important that is when we get to the playoffs?
Yeah, I think right now we probably have the top 4 pretty separated. I think there's a lot of teams, like including the Mavs, that are trying to still fully figure out what they have. I think we've seen flashes so far because it's been like a couple of games where there's a lot to like about it. But if we can continue to see, a larger sample size where they're like winning games consistently, everything looks fluid. I think then we can probably start having conversations about, are they in a contention situation, having Luka and Kyrie, if they're healthy come playoff time, as long as they have the the defensive versatility needed, which they seem to have added, as long as those pieces stay healthy too, because Maxi's health is a big part of it. And then now there's more depth. I think what we were able to see is like from the start of the season, what they have, what they needed to patch up, and they did patch up a good amount of it. So now it's a matter of can they stay healthy, build that continuity, and then stay healthy come playoff time. Because I don't want to keep saying the H word, but it's like that's just such a big part of this team's
It's
season so
huge.
far. Yeah, and then like we need to see it for an extended opportunity. Like PJ Washington's shot will need to fall eventually. Like we also like he's gonna get the looks, but also I don't want to like say anything like there's not an opinion, but we also had Grant Williams getting a lot of open shots too, and he wasn't necessarily converting on a consistent basis. But with PJ Washington, you have a more versatile option as well, as we talked about earlier. So what we're going to have to see is how all that like consistently factors in. Like as teams get the scouting reports a good like 10, 12 games after, how they start playing these guys will be very important. And then we're kind of relearning what they have in a sense at that point too, because the first 8 games, Grant Williams was phenomenal. He was averaging like 15 plus hitting shots. And then teams, once you hit that 8 to 10 to 12 sort of range, they start making adjustments on how they're playing other teams. So right now it's very early and very encouraging. But once we know more, I think we could start having conversations about that top, like the more top teams in the West. But for now, like Minnesota, it's tough to necessarily say Oklahoma City, in my opinion, because they just don't have much playoff experience. Like
Sure.
I think they're a very good team, and they probably are like very high up in this conversation since they're like one game back from first. But like LA Clippers, much more experienced playoff team. Denver Nuggets doesn't get much better experience than coming off a title run. So
that's right.
Kevin Durant's a multi-time Finals MVP with the Suns. They have a lot of talent that's seen. Well, Bradley Beal hasn't really earlier in his career with the Wizards, he did see playoff action, but like they're a team that also has to stay healthy as well. So I feel like that's kind of the themes that we have with Phoenix, Dallas, and even New Orleans with Zion and other guys like that. Their key players have had injury problems. That's a key theme for those teams that are in that next tier, in my opinion, until we see more. And then we can kind of trust the health when we see it, because it's very hard to bank on a full season of like Zion Williamson or Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving based off like the injury situations that we've seen throughout careers and stuff. But a lot of it's about catching breaks. So if you catch a break with health while another team doesn't, that can make all the difference. Just like Theo Pinson was talking about with the Brooklyn Nets, or always talks about, I should say. Kyrie goes down, James Harden goes down. That's a different series. Some people thought that the Nets were going to win that entire championship, and all of a sudden they didn't. So, a lot of it will depend on that. But for now, very encouraging results from what we've seen.
And with that, you talked about the adjustments, which is key because, in the interim, we've seen what things have looked like so far with Gafford and Washington, how effective they've been. And you talk about the adjustments that teams will make to them and what the personnel looks like for the Mavericks. That's where I come to Jason Kidd and say, are you going to be the difference now for the rest of the season based off of what teams are going to try to do to schematically deal with Luka and Kyrie, which is not much, obviously. But more importantly, the other guys when it comes to Washington and Gafford and Green and Hardy and these other guys, how does Jason Kidd become the difference maker? We know how good they've been in terms of coming out of the timeouts. They've been one of the best teams in the league, with their out of timeout efficiency. But at the same time, Jason Kidd now, he's got the look. This team, they've got the personnel that they believe that they need to win games going forward here. Now, can Jason Kidd put this team in position night in and night out for them to execute a game plan? And, players talk about with this team all the time that they feel like they're put in good positions to execute game plans based on what teams are trying to do to them night in and night out. We'll need to see how that moves forward for the rest of the year coming out of the All-Star break. And it's going to be on Jason Kidd to be able to do that, because if he can, now we can start having real legitimate discussions about this team being that proverbial, you don't want to see that team in the playoff type deal. Jason Kidd, I feel like, has got to be the difference when it comes to that.
Yeah, and actually it was interesting last night. I asked Kyrie about, like in the post-game press conference, just about like what, as you guys started slow, but you got it going, kind of what did you see, what adjusted, what changed? And then he mentioned exactly what you said. He said, we really locked in on our game plan. And I know Sean Sweeney and Jason Kidd were happy about that. So if teams are going to get a focused effort from their players from start to finish, that's probably going to be a far more consistent outcome,
Yes.
as opposed to kind of, getting away from the game plan or coming out flat and things like that. You can't play at one of the worst teams in the NBA and get outscored by their opposing star through like the first 5 or 6 minutes and on a consistent basis. They ended up pulling away and comfortably winning, but a more focused start to finish approach is definitely going to be needed. And I think that's easier to accomplish when you have more comfort level with players like, PJ Washington continued to start. That was his second game starting. Derek Lively coming off the bench. Daniel Gafford started the second game in a row. So those players that are still new to the team overall. And once, Derek Lively comes out of the break, has more of a rhythm and, whatever they end up doing with their lineup choices and all that stuff, they got to find a plan. And I'm not saying stick to something that doesn't work, but you got to have continuity and build on it. And whether, that's probably, in my opinion, Derek Lively, starting, because that was his job the whole year. And Daniel Gafford is the backup center that Luka's wanted for, about 3 years, as he said.
Exactly.
Yeah. So sticking to a plan, building the chemistry, and not having injuries will be, very important. And sticking to the game plan, building on the game plan, and seeing how other teams game plan for you. Health and game plans, two very frequently mentioned things for sure.
Grant, tell the folks so they can find you, what you got going on, man.
Yeah, during the All-Star break, I'm going to have a lot of video, breakdown stuff, just looking at a lot of these things that we've talked about, showing the clips and, getting into details and nuances of it on my YouTube channel, just my full name, Grant Afseth, and then a lot of articles on DallasBasketball.com as well. And I'm sure we'll have conversations on here as well too. Even though there won't be a whole lot that's going on, we probably won't deep dive the dunk contest with how mid that's become. But we'll talk about the Mavs, I'm sure, at some point soon.
Yeah, we'll definitely have a preview of the post All-Star break before the Mavericks resume play next Thursday. But just like the NBA, we'll take a little bit of a break ourselves for a few days. But once we get a little bit closer to the resumption of the NBA season, we'll have our post All-Star break preview show, if you will, to give you an idea on how we're feeling about the Mavericks going forward based on what they are going to be looking to do after the All-Star break has concluded. But we'll enjoy it just as much as everybody else will. And we'll see Derek Lively, as I mentioned, and Luka Doncic representing the Mavericks during All-Star weekend. So it should be a lot of fun for those two. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to download and subscribe to the Inside the Mavs podcast. Wherever you get podcasts for free, give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, really appreciate you joining us here on our latest episode. You can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on iHeartRadio. As I mentioned, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak, the home of Dallas Mavericks basketball. I am, of course, your Mavericks pre- and post-game host. You can catch me on every Mavericks radio broadcast each and every time the Mavs take the floor. For Grant Afseth, my name is Kevin Gray. That'll do it for today's episode. We'll talk to you next time here on Inside the Mavs. Enjoy the All-Star break. And when we come back, we'll get you ready for the post-All-Star break schedule for your Dallas Mavericks. Until then, we'll talk to you later. Peace.